What if I told you that the biggest boy band in the history of modern music, a group that sold out stadiums on every continent, broke records that hadn't been touched in decades, and literally spoke at the United Nations, has been quietly, privately, and sometimes painfully wrestling with one massive question behind the scenes: when does it all end? You see, most fans celebrate the concerts, the albums, the sold-out arenas, and the Billboard #1s. But very few people talk about what happens when the lights go off, when the cameras stop rolling, and when 7 young men from South Korea sit alone in their rooms asking themselves, am I ready to let this go? Here's what most people don't realize. BTS's contract with Hybe Corporation isn't eternal. It has an expiration date. And each member, from the leader who carried the group on his back since 2013 to the youngest who grew up entirely in front of the world, has said something, hinted at something, or flat out confessed something about retirement that most fans either missed or refused to believe. So the real question is, who among the 7 has already mentally prepared to walk away? Who secretly considered a completely different life? Who almost didn't renew? And who said something so shocking about the future of BTS that even the other members didn't see it coming? Buckle up, because we're counting down from number 7 to number 1, and trust me, the closer we get to that top spot, the harder this list hits. Let's get into it. Number 7. Taehyung. The idol who secretly dreamed of disappearing. You know what's funny about Kim Taehyung? The whole world sees him as this untouchable, effortlessly cool, devastatingly handsome idol who walks through life like every room is his personal runway. But behind that deep voice and those piercing eyes, there's a guy who has been quietly, almost secretly, fantasizing about a life where nobody knows his name. And no, I'm not exaggerating. This is something that V himself has talked about multiple times, in interviews, in live broadcasts, in those late-night Weverse lives where he just sits there with a glass of wine, staring into the camera like he's having a one-on-one conversation with each of the millions of people watching. And if you actually paid attention to what he was saying, not just screaming because he looked gorgeous, you would have caught something that honestly should have made every army stop and think. Let's rewind for a second. Kim Taehyung was born on December 30th, 1995, in Daegu, South Korea, and raised in Gyeocheong, a small, quiet, rural farming town in South Gyeongsang Province. And when I say rural, I mean rural. We're talking rice fields, mountain air, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and the loudest sound at night is crickets. Taehyung grew up in that world. He grew up helping his family with farming, running around in open fields, living a life that was about as far from the K-pop industry as you can possibly imagine. And here's the thing that most fans don't fully appreciate: that world never left him. Even after years of performing in front of hundreds of thousands of people, even after being named the most handsome man in the world more times than anyone can count, even after walking red carpets and rubbing shoulders with Hollywood A-listers, Taehyung has said, repeatedly and without hesitation, that one of his ultimate dreams is to go back. To go back to that simplicity. To own a farm. To live somewhere quiet. To raise animals. To wake up without a schedule. To exist without being V from BTS. Now, some fans hear that and think, oh, that's just Tae being quirky and random again. But it's not. If you trace the pattern of his statements over the years, you start to see something deeper forming: a real, genuine, almost philosophical tension between the life he loves and the life he actually wants. In a 2019 interview, Taehyung was asked about what he'd be doing if he wasn't an idol, and without missing a beat, he said he'd probably be a farmer. He said it with a smile, sure, but there was no punchline. He wasn't joking. He elaborated. He talked about how he finds peace in nature, how the idea of working with his hands and being connected to the earth appeals to him on a level that performing on stage simply doesn't reach. And if that was the only time he said something like that, maybe you could brush it off. But it wasn't. During a Bon Voyage episode, while the members were traveling together, Taehyung opened up about how sometimes he feels like he's living someone else's life. Think about that for a second. Here's a man who is arguably one of the most famous human beings on the planet, and he's sitting there saying that the life he's living doesn't always feel like his. That's not a throwaway comment. That's an existential confession. And it hits differently when you understand his backstory, because Taehyung almost wasn't even in BTS. Most fans know the story by now, but it's worth repeating because it adds so much context to everything he says about the future. When Taehyung went to the big hit audition, he wasn't even planning to audition himself. He went to support a friend. It was a staff member who saw him waiting outside and encouraged him to try out. He auditioned on the spot, almost on a whim, and he got in. He was then kept as a hidden member, meaning even when the other BTS members were being introduced to the public pre-debut, Taehyung's existence in the group was kept secret until the very last moment. He was literally the last member revealed. So from the very beginning, his entry into this world was accidental, unplanned, almost like the universe just grabbed him and threw him into the spotlight without asking permission. And maybe that's why, deep down, a part of him has always felt like a visitor in this industry rather than a permanent resident. Now, here's where it gets really interesting when we talk about retirement and the Hybe contract. Taehyung has always been the member who most openly pursued interests outside the traditional idol framework. While other members were laser-focused on music production or performance, Taehyung was diving into acting. He starred in the 2016 KBS historical drama Warang, The Poet Warrior Youth, where he played the role of Hansung. And his performance was genuinely praised. He didn't just do it as a side gig or a brand play, he actually studied the craft, took it seriously, and has since expressed multiple times that acting is something he wants to pursue long-term. His close friendships within the Suga squad, a group that includes major Korean actors like Park Seo-joon, Choi Woo-sik, Park Hyung-sik, and P-boy, aren't just social connections. They're a window into the world Taehyung gravitates toward when BTS isn't actively promoting. He spends his free time with actors, with creatives, with people who live in a different entertainment lane entirely. And that tells you something. Then there's his solo music, which honestly reads like a love letter to a quieter, more introspective life. His solo album Layover, released in September 2023, wasn't a bombastic pop statement. It wasn't trying to break records or dominate charts with high-energy bangers. It was soft. It was jazzy. It was atmospheric and moody and deeply personal. Songs like Slow Dancing, Rainy Days, and Love Me Again felt like they were made for late nights alone, for reflection, for someone who's processing what it means to slow down after years of going at full speed. The album's very title, Layover, is a travel term meaning a pause between journeys. And V himself explained that the album represented a moment of rest, a breath between chapters. If that isn't a man mentally preparing for a transition, I don't know what is. And let's talk about military service for a moment, because it's impossible to discuss BTS and retirement without addressing it. Taehyung enlisted alongside Jimin on December 11, 2023, entering the military together. And while enlistment is mandatory for all Korean men, the way Taehyung approached it was telling. He didn't seem reluctant or devastated. He seemed almost at peace with it. Like the break was something he needed, not just something he had to endure. In his final messages to fans before enlisting, he was warm but calm, reassuring but not desperate. There was no "please wait for me" energy drenched in anxiety. There was a quiet confidence, a sense that he knew who he was going to be on the other side of this, and that person might not look exactly like V the idol anymore. Now, does all of this mean Taehyung wants to completely quit BTS and never come back? Not necessarily. But here's what it does mean. Out of all 7 members, V is the one who has most consistently, most openly, and most honestly signaled that his identity extends far beyond the stage. He sees himself as an actor, an artist, a photographer, a man who might one day trade his microphone for a camera or his studio for a countryside home. And when that Hybe contract reaches its next critical negotiation point, the question won't be whether Taehyung can continue as V from BTS, it'll be whether he wants to. And based on everything he said, everything he's hinted at, and every quiet confession he's made in those late-night live streams when he thinks the world isn't paying close enough attention, the answer might not be what ARMY wants to hear. But then again, maybe that's exactly what makes Kim Taehyung so fascinating. He was never supposed to be here in the first place, and he's never pretended that he has to stay forever. Number 6. J-Hope, the sunshine who volunteered to walk into the dark first. Let's be brutally honest about something that a lot of people felt, but very few had the guts to actually say out loud. When BTS announced in June 2022 that they were going on an extended hiatus to focus on solo activities and eventually fulfill their military service obligations, the question on everybody's mind wasn't if they would enlist. It was who would go first. Because going first meant something. Going first meant being the one to break the seal, to shatter the illusion that maybe, just maybe, BTS could somehow avoid or delay the inevitable. Going first meant stepping away from the spotlight, shaving your head, putting on a uniform, and essentially telling the world, the era you knew is officially pausing, and I'm the one turning off the lights. It's a heavy burden. It's a symbolic act. And out of all 7 members, the one who raised his hand and said, "I'll do it," was the person most fans would never have expected to lead that charge, young Hoseok. J-Hope, the eternal sunshine, the mood maker. The guy whose entire public identity was built around energy, positivity, and relentless optimism. And yet, he was the first one to walk through that door. And if you think that decision was random or logistical or just about age order, you're dead wrong. Because J-Hope's decision to enlist first, on April 18, 2023, was the culmination of something that had been building inside him for years, a quiet, deeply personal reckoning with who he is outside of BTS, what he wants his legacy to be, and whether the person the world calls J-Hope is the same person young Hoseok sees when he looks in the mirror. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the origin story matters. Young Hoseok was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Korea, a city known for its fierce spirit, its history of democratic resistance, and its vibrant arts scene. And from a very young age, Hoseok was consumed by one thing: dance. Not casually. Not as a hobby. This kid was a machine. He joined a street dance crew called Neuron and became so good that he was winning national dance competitions before he even hit high school. We're talking about a teenager who is already being recognized as one of the most talented underground dancers in Gwangju, a city that takes its dance culture seriously. He was so skilled, so disciplined, so relentlessly dedicated that when he auditioned for big hit entertainment, he wasn't auditioning to be an idol in the traditional sense. He was auditioning because he saw it as a path to perform on a bigger stage. Dancing was his identity. It was the thing that made him him. And then BTS happened. And suddenly, the dancer from Gwangju had to become something much bigger, much more complex. He had to become a rapper, a performer, a variety show personality, a leader of energy on stage. And most importantly, he had to become J-Hope, the human embodiment of hope, positivity, and light. And he did it. He did it so well that for years, J-Hope became synonymous with sunshine in the K-pop world. Whenever BTS was tired, J-Hope was the one lifting the mood. Whenever tensions ran high during practice, J-Hope was the one cracking jokes and keeping the peace. Whenever fans were sad, J-Hope was the one reminding them that everything would be okay. But here's what nobody talks about: the cost of being the sun. Because the sun doesn't get to have bad days. The sun doesn't get to be dim. The sun doesn't get to say, "I'm tired, I need to stop shining for a while." And J-Hope carried that weight for a decade. There were moments, scattered across V Lives and behind-the-scenes footage and the BTS monuments, Beyond the Star documentary, where you could see the cracks. Moments where Hoseok would go quiet, where the smile would fade just slightly, where he'd say something like, "I wonder if people would still like me if I wasn't always happy." That's not a casual remark. That's a man questioning whether his value to the group and to the world is conditional on his performance of joy. And that question, that existential doubt, is directly connected to why he made the choices he made regarding retirement and the future. Let's talk about Jack in the Box. Released on July 15, 2022, just weeks after BTS announced their hiatus, this album was not what anyone expected from J-Hope. It wasn't bright. It wasn't hopeful. It wasn't sunshine. It was dark. It was raw. It was experimental. It was angry, introspective, aggressive, and unapologetically different from anything he'd ever put out under the J-Hope name. The lead single, More, was a gritty, punk-influenced track that felt like a primal scream, a man shouting into the void that he needed more from life than the role he'd been playing. The other title track, Arson, dealt explicitly with the fear of burnout, of being consumed by the very fire that made him successful. The album drew heavily from the Pandora's box myth, the idea that once you open certain truths about yourself, you can never close them again. And J-Hope opened that box wide. Critics praised the album for its artistic courage. But more importantly, fans who actually really listened to the lyrics realized something unsettling. J-Hope wasn't just making art. He was processing a transformation. He was publicly, musically documenting his transition from the person BTS needed him to be into the person he actually wanted to become. And then came Lollapalooza. On July 31st, 2022, J-Hope headlined Lollapalooza in Chicago, becoming the first South Korean artist to headline a major American music festival. And the performance was unreal. The energy, the stage presence, the choreography, the set list, he absolutely demolished that stage. But what made it significant wasn't just the performance itself. It was what it represented. J-Hope wasn't performing as BTS's J-Hope that night. He was performing as J-Hope, solo artist. And the crowd, over 100,000 people, wasn't there for BTS. They were there for him. That distinction matters enormously when we talk about retirement and contracts, because it proved something that even Hoseok himself might not have been fully sure of until that moment. He can stand alone. He doesn't need 6 other members flanking him to fill a stadium. He doesn't need the BTS brand to draw a crowd. He is, in his own right, a main stage headlining, festival closing, crowd-commanding artist. And once you prove that to yourself, the calculation about whether to renew a group contract changes dramatically. Because it's no longer, I need BTS to survive. It becomes, I choose BTS because I want to, not because I have to. And that's a fundamentally different negotiating position. Now, the military. J-Hope enlisted on April 18, 2023, entering active duty as the first BTS member to do so. And the way he handled it was remarkably composed. He shaved his head, he smiled, he waved to the fans who gathered to see him off, and he walked in. No drama. No tears on camera. No long, drawn-out farewell. Just quiet dignity and forward motion. But behind that composure was a decision that carries enormous weight. By going first, J-Hope essentially took the burden off the other members. He set the tone. He showed that it could be done with grace, that stepping away from the idol world didn't have to be tragic or chaotic. He led by example, which, when you think about it, is exactly what J-Hope has always done. Not with words, not with grand speeches, but with action. He completed his military service and was discharged on October 17, 2024, making him the first member to return. And when he came back, the energy was different. He was different. Not worse, not diminished, just evolved. The man who went in as the eternal sunshine came out as something more nuanced, more grounded, more deliberate. And here's the part that connects all of this to the retirement conversation. J-Hope has never been the type to make dramatic declarations about the future. He doesn't do the BTS forever rallying cry as loudly or as frequently as some of the other members. Instead, he lets his actions speak. And his actions over the past few years, the solo album that broke from BTS's sound, the festival headline that proved his independence, the voluntary early enlistment that signaled he was ready to move into new chapters, all point in one direction. J-Hope loves BTS. He respects what BTS built. He is grateful for what BTS gave him. But young Hoseok is preparing for a world where BTS is not the center of his universe anymore. He's not running away from the group. He's not bitter or resentful. He's simply doing what he's always done, moving forward, leading the way, and trusting that the others will follow when they're ready. The sunshine hasn't gone out. It's just decided that it's allowed to shine in more than one direction. And when that Hybe contract comes up for its next critical decision point, Don't be surprised if J-Hope is the one who approaches it with the clearest head and the least hesitation, because he's already done the hardest part. He's already proven to himself and to the world that young Hoseok exists beyond J-Hope and that both versions of him deserve a future. Number 5. Jimin. The perfectionist who almost convinced himself he didn't deserve to stay. Okay, this one is going to hit different. Because when we talk about BTS members and their thoughts on retirement, most people expect the conversation to revolve around external factors, military service, contract negotiations, solo career ambitions, personal interests outside of music. And sure, those things matter. But with Park Jimin, the retirement conversation isn't about what's pulling him away from BTS. It's about something far more painful, far more intimate, and far more heartbreaking. It's about a man who, at the peak of his career, standing at the very top of the global music industry, looked at himself and genuinely questioned whether he had the right to be there at all. And I know that sounds dramatic. I know that sounds like fan fiction or exaggeration. But it's not. This is documented. This is on camera. This is in interviews, in behind-the-scenes footage, in tearful confessions during concerts, and in the raw, unfiltered lyrics of his solo music. Park Jimin, the same man who made history as the first Korean solo artist to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the same man who is widely considered one of the greatest performers in K-pop history, the same man whose fan cams regularly break the internet with tens of millions of views, has spent a significant portion of his career genuinely believing that he is the weakest link in BTS. And that belief, that relentless, corrosive, suffocating self-doubt, is the most dangerous retirement threat that no contract renewal can fix. Let me take you to Busan, South Korea, where this story begins. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, and from a very early age, he was drawn to movement, to expression, to the physical language of dance. He wasn't the kid who casually took dance classes after school. He was the kid who got accepted into the Busan High School of Arts as a top student in the contemporary dance department. Contemporary dance. Not hip-hop, not street dance, not the kind of sharp, aggressive choreography that K-pop typically demands. Contemporary dance, fluid, emotional, expressive, artistic. The kind of dance where every movement tells a story, where technique meets soul, where your body becomes an instrument of raw human emotion. That was Jimin's foundation. That was his first language. And when he auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment and eventually joined the BTS trainee program, he had to fundamentally rewire himself. He had to learn hip-hop. He had to learn to rap. He had to learn the idol system, the variety shows, the fan service, the image management, the relentless public scrutiny. And here's the part that most people don't know or don't fully appreciate. Jimin was the last member confirmed for the BTS lineup. He was the one whose position was most uncertain. While other members had been training at Big Hit for years, Jimin arrived relatively late, transferring from Busan to Seoul with a tremendous amount of pressure on his shoulders and very little time to prove himself. There were moments during the training period where his place in the group was genuinely in question. He was told he needed to improve. He was told he wasn't keeping up. He was pushed to the edge physically and emotionally. And instead of breaking, he responded with something that would come to define his entire career: obsessive, punishing, relentless perfectionism. Jimin became the member who practiced the hardest. He became the member who stayed in the studio the longest. He became the member who would repeat a single move hundreds of times until it was flawless. And that work ethic, that refusal to accept anything less than perfection, is what turned him into the extraordinary performer the world knows today. But here's the dark side of that perfectionism: it never turned off. Even after BTS became the biggest band in the world, even after sold-out stadium tours and Grammy nominations and United Nations speeches, Jimin's internal monologue never upgraded from "you need to prove yourself" to "you've made it." The self-doubt stayed. It metastasized. It became a permanent resident in his psyche, whispering to him that every success was a fluke, every compliment was politeness, and every standing ovation was meant for the 6 other guys standing next to him. This isn't speculation. This is what Jimin himself has said, repeatedly, across years of public appearances. In the Break the Silence documentary, Jimin broke down crying while talking about how he felt like he wasn't good enough for the group. He literally said on camera, with tears streaming down his face, that he worried he was holding BTS back. Let that sink in. A man who is objectively one of the most talented, most charismatic, most beloved performers on the planet, sitting there sobbing because he genuinely believes he's a burden to his own group. In multiple behind-the-scenes clips from tours, you can see Jimin after performances, not celebrating, not basking in the adrenaline, but replaying moments in his head, fixating on the one move that was slightly off, the one note that didn't hit perfectly, the one transition that could have been smoother. While other members were laughing and decompressing, Jimin was self-flagellating. And the other members knew it. RM has talked about it. Suga has talked about it. They've all, at various points, tried to reassure Jimin that he's not just good enough, he's exceptional. But the thing about deeply rooted self-doubt is that it doesn't respond to external validation. You can tell someone they're amazing 1,000 times, but if the voice inside their head is louder, it doesn't matter. Now, let's connect this to the retirement conversation, because this is where it gets really heavy. When BTS began their hiatus and members started pursuing solo work, Jimin released his first solo album, Face, on March 24, 2023. And the title alone tells you everything you need to know about where his head was at. Face. As in, facing yourself. Confronting yourself. Looking in the mirror without the group, without the safety net, without the 6 brothers standing beside you, and asking, who am I? Am I enough? Can I do this alone? The album was deeply personal. Tracks like Alone dealt explicitly with the isolation and loneliness that comes when the group dynamic dissolves and you're left standing by yourself. Set Me Free PT2 was a visceral, almost aggressive declaration of wanting to break free from the chains of expectation, both external and self-imposed. And Like Crazy, which became a global smash hit and made Billboard history, was wrapped in a melancholy that most pop songs don't dare to touch. The feeling of losing yourself in the chaos, of numbing the pain with temporary escapes, of not knowing whether the person you've become is the person you actually want to be. And here's the thing that makes Face so significant in the context of retirement. It wasn't an album about missing BTS or counting down the days until the group reunites. It was an album about a man standing at a crossroads, terrified of both directions. Terrified of going forward alone because he doesn't trust himself to be enough. Terrified of going back to the group because he's not sure the group still needs the version of him that he's becoming. That's not a career strategy. That's an identity crisis. And identity crises are where retirement decisions are actually made, not in boardrooms with contract lawyers, but in the quiet, sleepless hours when a person asks themselves, can I keep doing this? Do I even want to keep doing this? And if I stop, does anything about me still matter? Then came Muse, his second solo album, released in July 2024, which showed a different, more romantic and lighter side, but still carried that undercurrent of searching, of reaching for something beyond the idol persona, of trying to find meaning and connection in a world that constantly reduces him to a product. The single, Who, became another massive hit, but lyrically, it was still a man asking questions, still seeking, still not fully settled in his own skin. Jimin enlisted alongside V on December 11, 2023, and his departure was emotional in a way that was distinctly Jimin. He cried. Of course he cried. But the tears weren't just about leaving fans or pausing his career. They were about stepping into an environment where his identity would be stripped down to its most basic form. No stage. No choreography. No screaming crowds. Just young Hoseok, just Park Jimin, a soldier among soldiers, nobody special, nobody extraordinary. And for a man who has spent his entire adult life desperately trying to prove that he is special enough to stand on that stage, the military's great equalizer must have been both terrifying and, in a strange way, potentially liberating. Because here's the paradox of Jimin's relationship with retirement. Part of him is exhausted by the constant need to prove himself, by the perfectionism that never lets him rest, by the self-doubt that turns every performance into a pass-fail exam. And the idea of stepping away, of no longer having to be perfect Park Jimin every single day, might actually sound like relief. But the other part of him, the part that came from Busan with nothing but a dream and sheer stubbornness, can't imagine a life where he's not on that stage, because the stage is where he fights his demons. Number 4. Jin. The eldest who quietly carried everyone's weight before walking out the door first. Here's something that people need to understand about Kim Seokjin, and I mean really understand, not in the surface level, oh he's the funny one, he's worldwide handsome, he tells dad jokes, way that the internet has reduced him to. Jin is the oldest member of BTS. And in Korean culture, being the oldest isn't just a number. It's a role. It's a responsibility. It's an unspoken contract that says you go first into the fire, you absorb the hits so the younger ones don't have to, you carry the emotional weight of the group on your shoulders even when your own back is breaking. And you do it all with a smile because that's what a good hyung does. And Kim Seokjin, born December 4th, 1992, a full 5 years older than the youngest member Jungkook, has been playing that role since 2013, since the very beginning. Since before BTS was anything more than a dream stitched together in a cramped practice room by 7 kids who had no idea they were about to change the world. And the thing about Jin that makes his relationship with retirement so fascinating, so layered, so emotionally complex, is that he was never supposed to be here in the first place. Not in the way the others were. Let me explain. Most BTS members came to big hit entertainment through traditional pathways. They auditioned, they trained, they fought tooth and nail for a spot in the group. But Jin? Jin was walking down the street near Konkuk University, where he was studying acting and film, when a big hit casting manager literally saw his face and thought, that person needs to be a star. He was street cast, scouted, plucked out of ordinary life and dropped into the trainee system, not because he had years of vocal training or dance experience, he had neither, but because he had a face that could stop traffic. And while that might sound like a fairy tale, the reality of what followed was anything but. Because Jin entered Big Hit as arguably the least prepared member of what would become BTS. He couldn't dance. He had minimal vocal training. He was surrounded by members who had been honing their craft for years. Suga and RM were already underground rappers with established reputations. J-Hope was a nationally recognized street dancer. Jimin was a top contemporary dance student. And there was Jin, the acting student who got scouted for his looks, trying to keep up in a room full of prodigies. The gap was enormous. And Jin knew it. He has spoken about this openly, about how during the early trainee days, he would stay behind after practice, alone in the studio for hours, desperately trying to teach his body movements that came naturally to the others. He talked about watching the other members nail choreography on the first or second try while he was still struggling on the 15th. He talked about the shame of it, the embarrassment, the feeling that he was the one member who didn't belong, that he was there by accident, by the randomness of a casting manager's glance on a random street on a random day. And yet, he stayed. He stayed, he worked, he improved, and he carved out a role for himself in BTS that went far beyond visuals. He became the emotional anchor. The hyung who cooked for the younger members when they were homesick. The one who used humor, those legendary dad jokes, those exaggerated reactions, that absurd, infectious, windshield wiper laugh as a tool to keep the atmosphere light when the pressure of idol life threatened to crush them all. Jin's comedy wasn't frivolous. It was strategic. It was survival. It was a man saying, I may not be the best singer or the best dancer in this room, but I will make damn sure that everyone in this room feels okay. And that's an incredibly selfless way to exist inside a group, to define your value not by your individual talent, but by your ability to hold everyone else together. But here's where it gets painful when we talk about retirement. Because the thing about being the eldest in a K-pop group is that you're constantly, inescapably aware of the clock. K-pop is a young person's industry. It's built on youth, on freshness, on the energy of people in their late teens and early 20s. And as the oldest member, Jin was always the first to hit every age milestone that the industry considers a liability. He was the first to turn 25. the first to turn 27, the first to turn 30. And with every birthday, the unspoken question got louder. How much longer can you do this? How much longer can you perform choreography designed for bodies a decade younger than yours? How much longer can you stand next to members who still look like they're in the prime of their youth while you navigate the subtle but undeniable changes that come with aging? Jin addressed this in his own way, usually through humor, because that's his armor. He'd joke about being old, about his worldwide handsome, face-defying time, about needing extra stretching before dance practice. But underneath the jokes, there was a man doing math. A man counting the years, measuring the gap, wondering when the day would come that the gap became too wide to bridge with a smile and a punchline. And then came the military. Jin enlisted on December 13, 2022, becoming the first BTS member to begin his mandatory military service. And the significance of that timing cannot be overstated. There had been enormous public debate in South Korea, literally at the governmental level, about whether BTS should receive a military exemption. The Korean National Assembly even revised the Military Service Act in 2020 to allow top-tier cultural figures to defer enlistment until age 30, a provision widely seen as the BTS law. Jin had used that deferment, pushing his enlistment deadline as far as it could go. But when the time came, when there were no more deferrals available, when the debate had raged for years without a definitive exemption being granted, Jin didn't wait for the government to save him. He didn't lobby. He didn't protest. He walked in. And before he walked in, he gave the world something extraordinary, The Astronaut. Released on October 28, 2022, just weeks before his enlistment, this song, a collaboration with Coldplay, was a farewell letter wrapped in a pop melody. The lyrics told the story of someone who had traveled far from home, experienced incredible things, loved deeply, and was now preparing to say goodbye, not forever, but for a while. And when Jin performed The Astronaut live for the last time before enlisting, the concert footage is almost unbearable to watch. He's standing there, singing to tens of thousands of fans, knowing that in a matter of days he's going to shave his head, put on a uniform, and become Private Kim Seokjin. And the fans are sobbing. And the other members are trying to hold it together. And Jin is the one comforting everyone else. Even in his own farewell, he couldn't stop being the Hyung. He couldn't stop taking care of people. He smiled through it. He waved. He told everyone he'd be fine. Because that's what the eldest does. The eldest goes first, and the eldest makes it look easy so the younger ones aren't afraid when their turn comes. Jin completed his military service and was discharged on June 12, 2024, making him the first member to return. And his return was marked by something beautiful and revealing, a hug event with 1,000 fans, where he literally embraced each person individually. It was warm, it was intimate, and it was so fundamentally Jin, this man who expresses love not through grand artistic statements, but through physical presence, through showing up, through being there. But here's what happened after the military that really matters for the retirement conversation. Jin released his first solo album, Happy, on November 15, 2024. And the title alone, Happy, feels like a declaration. Not tortured artist. Not identity crisis. Not searching for meaning. Just happy. The album was warm, joyful, uncomplicated in a way that felt almost revolutionary in an era where solo K-pop albums are expected to be deep, dark, and emotionally devastating. Jin seemed to be saying, I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I don't need to be the most talented. I don't need to be the most artistically complex. I just want to make music that makes people feel good, the same way I've been trying to make people feel good since 2013. And maybe that's the most honest statement about retirement that any BTS member has made, not through dramatic declarations or existential crises, but through the simple act of choosing happiness over ambition. Because here's what Jin knows that some of the younger members are still learning. The industry doesn't owe you anything. The fame is temporary. The screaming crowds will eventually quiet down. The records will eventually be broken by someone else. And when all of that fades, the only thing that matters is whether you enjoyed the ride. Jin, by all evidence, enjoyed the ride. He's grateful for it. He loves ARMY. He loves his members. But he also spent 18 months in the military, away from all of it, and he survived. He more than survived. He came back lighter, freer, more at peace than he's ever seemed. And that peace is both beautiful and, for fans who want BTS to last forever, slightly terrifying. Because a man who has found peace outside the group is a man who doesn't need the group to be whole. He can choose it. He can enjoy it. But he's no longer dependent on it. Number 3. Suga. The man who looked the world in the eye and said BTS won't last forever. Every group has that one member who refuses to sugarcoat reality. The one who won't play the game of pretending everything is eternal, everything is fine, and the fairy tale never ends. In BTS, that person is Min Yoongi. And the reason he sits this high on our list, number 3, above his Seokjin, above the sunshine J-Hope, above the perfectionist Jimin, above the free-spirited V, is because Suga didn't just hint at thoughts about retirement or the end of BTS. He didn't hide it behind metaphors or bury it in album concepts that only the most obsessive lyric analysts would decode. No. Min Yoongi sat down, looked directly into cameras, opened his mouth, and said it plainly, clearly, and without flinching, BTS won't last forever. He said that out loud. In a world where idols are contractually and culturally conditioned to say, we'll be together forever, where the very suggestion that a group might someday end is treated as blasphemy by fans, where entire careers have been destroyed by a single misinterpreted comment about the future, Min Yoongi chose honesty over comfort. And that, right there, tells you everything you need to know about who this man is and why his position in the retirement conversation is unlike any other members. Let me take you back to Daegu, South Korea. March 9, 1993, the day Min Yoongi was born into a family that, by his own description, didn't have much. They weren't poor in the dramatic, cinematic sense that makes for good origin stories, but they were tight. Money was a constant worry. And in that environment, young Yoongi discovered the one thing that made the walls of his small world feel less suffocating: music. Specifically, hip-hop. He heard it and something clicked. Not casually, not as a passing interest, but as a calling. By the time he was in middle school, Yoongi was writing lyrics. By high school, he was part of Daegu's underground hip-hop scene, performing under the name Gloss, building a reputation as a serious, technically skilled rapper with bars that hit like bricks. He wasn't doing this for fun. He wasn't dabbling. He was dead serious about becoming a professional musician, and he was willing to sacrifice everything for it. And sacrifice he did. His parents didn't support his music career. Not at first. They wanted stability, a real job, a safe path, which, for a working-class family in Daegu, was a perfectly rational desire. But Yoongi couldn't be rational about music. It was oxygen to him. So he pushed forward, against his family's wishes, into one of the most brutal and unforgiving industries on the planet. He auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment in 2010, and he got in, but not as an idol trainee. He came in as a producer and rapper. That distinction is critical, because it means that from the very beginning, Min Yoongi's relationship with the performance side of K-pop, the dancing, the fan service, the idol image, was complicated. He didn't sign up to be a dancing idol. He signed up to make music. And then BTS happened, and suddenly, making music also meant choreography, variety shows, airport fashion, and millions of people screaming his stage name while he performed routines that his body was never built to do. And speaking of his body, let's talk about the shoulder. During his trainee days, before BTS debuted, Yoongi was working part-time as a delivery boy to make ends meet. Big Hit wasn't exactly a wealthy company back then. They were a small, struggling label that couldn't afford to fully support all their trainees. So Yoongi delivered. And one day, he was in an accident. He was hit by a car while on his delivery bike, and the impact severely damaged his shoulder. The injury was serious. It was the kind of injury that could have ended his career before it even started. But here's the thing: he didn't tell anyone. He hid it. He kept training, kept practicing, kept pushing through the pain because he was terrified that if the company found out, they'd cut him from the lineup. He was terrified that the one chance he had to escape Taegu, to prove to his parents that music wasn't a waste of time, would be taken away because of a busted shoulder from a delivery job he was only doing because he was too poor to not work. That injury never fully healed. It haunted him throughout BTS's career, affecting his ability to perform choreography, causing chronic pain that he managed through gritted teeth and sheer willpower. He eventually had surgery in November 2020, which required months of rehabilitation. And while the surgery helped, the damage was done, not just physically, but psychologically. Because every time that shoulder ached during a concert, every time he had to modify a dance move or push through pain that the audience couldn't see, it was a reminder that his body had an expiration date as a performer. And Min Yoongi is too smart, too realistic, too ruthlessly pragmatic to ignore that reminder. This pragmatism is what sets Suga apart in the retirement conversation. While other members process the future through emotion, Jimin through self-doubt, V through dreams of alternative lives, Jin through humor, Suga processes it through logic. Cold, clear, unblinking logic. He has said in interviews, multiple times across multiple years, that he views the idol lifespan realistically. He's studied the industry. He knows the patterns. He knows that groups peak, plateau, and eventually either disband or become legacy acts that reunite for occasional tours. He has never pretended that BTS is immune to this cycle. In a 2018 interview, he said something that shook fans to their core. "I think about the future a lot. Nothing lasts forever. BTS won't last forever. What matters is what we do with the time we have." Most idols would never say that. Most idols are trained to say, "We'll be together until the end." But Yoongi isn't most idols. He's a kid from Taegu's underground rap scene who clawed his way into the spotlight through pure talent and stubbornness, and he refuses to lie about reality just because the truth makes people uncomfortable. And then came August D. If you want to understand Min Yoongi's true feelings about retirement, legacy, and the end of eras, you don't look at his work as Suga of BTS. You look at his work as August D, his solo alter ego, the name derived from DT Suga reversed, with DT standing for Taegu Town. August D is where Yoongi takes off the BTS mask and speaks with absolute, unfiltered honesty about his life, his pain, his fears, and his vision for the future. The first August D mixtape, released in 2016, contained a track called The Last that remains one of the most shockingly candid songs ever released by an active K-pop idol. In it, Yoongi rapped about his depression, his anxiety disorder, his social phobia, his obsessive-compulsive tendencies, and, most disturbingly, his suicidal ideation. He didn't speak about these things in vague, poetic terms. He named them. He described them clinically, specifically, painfully. He talked about visiting a psychiatrist. He talked about the medication. He talked about the gap between the Suga that fans scream for and the Min Yoongi, who lies awake at night wondering if any of it matters. That song was a bomb detonated in the middle of an industry that demands perfection, happiness, and the illusion of invincibility. And it established August D as the space where Yoongi tells the truths that Suga can't. The second installment, D2, dropped in 2020 and continued this trajectory, more introspective, more confrontational, more willing to challenge the industry and his place in it. But it was the third and final chapter, D-Day, released on April 21, 2023, that cemented Suga's position as the BTS member who has most deliberately and consciously prepared for the end. Because D-Day wasn't just an album. It was a conclusion. Yoongi himself explicitly stated that this was the final August D project. The trilogy was complete. The story was over. And the name D-Day is not subtle. D-Day, the decisive day. The day of reckoning. The day when everything changes irrevocably. Musically, the album was a masterwork, blending rap, rock, pop, and orchestral elements into something that felt like a man taking a final panoramic look at his entire life before turning the page. Tracks like Hegium dissected societal chains and the desire for liberation. People PT2, a collaboration with IU, dealt with the acceptance that people come and go, that relationships are temporary, that holding on too tightly destroys the thing you're trying to preserve. And the closing track, Life Goes On, echoed the BTS single of the same name, but landed differently in the context of a solo farewell project, as if Yoongi was saying, yes, life goes on. Even after BTS. Even after August D. Even after all of this. Life continues, and I need to be ready for what comes next. The D-Day World Tour that followed was monumental. Suga performed solo concerts across Asia, the United States, and beyond, filling arenas entirely on his own. And the significance was the same as J-Hope's Lollapalooza moment, proof of concept. Proof that Yoongi doesn't need BTS to fill seats. Number 2. Jungkook. The golden magne who doesn't know who he is without BTS. This is the one that's going to break your heart. And I don't say that lightly, because every member on this list has a story that hurts in its own way. V's quiet longing for a simpler life, J-Hope's burden of being the perpetual son, Jimin's war with his own self-worth, Jin's silent sacrifice as the eldest, Suga's unflinching acceptance that nothing lasts forever. But Jungkook's story cuts different. It cuts deeper. Because while every other BTS member had some version of a life before the group, a childhood that was fully their own, an adolescence shaped by normal experiences, an identity that existed independent of a stage name, Jungkook did not. He was 15 years old when BTS debuted on June 13, 2013. 15. Not 15 the way Western pop stars are 15, where they've been on Disney Channel for 3 years and have a team of publicists managing their image. 15 the way a kid from Busan, South Korea is 15, still figuring out who he is, still growing into his body, still trying to understand the world, still years away from the kind of emotional maturity that allows a person to process fame, pressure, public scrutiny, and the complete erasure of a normal life. Jungkook didn't lose his normal life. He never had one. And that distinction is the key to understanding why his relationship with retirement is the most emotionally volatile, the most unpredictable, and the most genuinely heartbreaking of any BTS member. Let's go back to the very beginning. Jungkook was born on September 1, 1997, in Busan, the second largest city in South Korea. By all accounts, he was a typical kid, athletic, a little shy, competitive in the way that boys his age tend to be. He liked sports. He liked drawing. He liked music, but not in the prodigious, born to be a star way that origin stories usually spin it. He was a normal kid who happened to be good at a lot of things. And then, in 2011, at the age of 13, he auditioned for Superstar K3, one of South Korea's biggest televised singing competitions. He didn't win. He didn't even make it particularly far. But something happened during that audition that would change the trajectory of his entire life. 7 different entertainment companies sent him casting offers. 7. A 13-year-old kid sings on a TV show, doesn't win, and 7 companies want him. That's how obvious his raw talent was, even at that age. He could have gone to any of them. JYP Entertainment offered him a spot. So did other major labels with far more resources, far more prestige, and far better track records than the small, struggling company called Big Hit Entertainment. But Jungkook chose Big Hit. And the reason he chose Big Hit is a detail that becomes almost painfully significant in the context of retirement. He chose Big Hit because he saw Namjoon perform. He saw RM. He watched this tall, intense, impossibly charismatic rapper command a stage during an audition process, and something in 13-year-old Jungkook's brain said, I want to follow that person. He didn't choose the company. He chose the leader. He chose RM. And at 13 years old, without fully understanding what he was doing, Jungkook essentially handed the compass of his entire life to Namjoon and said, lead me. That's not a business decision. That's not a strategic career move. That's a child imprinting on a role model. And that imprinting has shaped every single aspect of Jungkook's life for the last 13 plus years. He moved to Seoul alone at 15. Let that settle for a moment. A 15-year-old boy left his family, his friends, his entire world in Busan, and moved to a different city to live in a dormitory with a bunch of older guys he barely knew, training for 14, 16, sometimes 18 hours a day in singing, dancing, rapping, and variety performance. He didn't go to a regular high school. He didn't hang out with friends his own age. He didn't experience the normal milestones of adolescence, the awkward first dates, the weekend hangouts, the slow process of figuring out your identity through trial and error, and the beautiful messiness of teenage life. Instead, his adolescence was choreography drills, vocal lessons, camera training, and the relentless pressure to improve, because Big Hit was a small company that couldn't afford to debut a group with any weak links, and Jungkook, despite his natural talent, was still a kid who needed molding. The other members became his family. Not metaphorically, literally. Jin cooked for him. Suga gave him advice. RM mentored him. J-Hope taught him dance. Jimin and V, closest to his age, became his brothers in the truest sense. BTS didn't just become Jungkook's career, it became his entire social ecosystem. The only friends he had were the 6 guys he lived with, practiced with, performed with, and traveled the world with. The only adults he trusted were the staff and managers who had been around since the beginning. The only reality he knew was this: the trainee life, the idol life, the BTS life. And as BTS grew from a struggling rookie group into the biggest musical act on the planet, Jungkook grew with them, but he grew inside the bubble. He went from 15 to 25 without ever stepping outside the BTS universe long enough to develop an independent sense of self. And this is where the Golden Magne label becomes both a crown and a cage. The nickname started as a compliment. Jungkook was good at everything. Singing? Elite. Dancing? Among the best in K-pop. Performing? Magnetic. Sports? Natural athlete. Art? Talented. Cooking? He learned from Jin. Filming and editing? He started producing his own content, the famous GCF Golden Closet films, travel videos that showcased a genuinely skilled eye for cinematography. Whatever Jungkook tried, he excelled at. Golden Magne. Golden everything. But here's the dark side of being golden at everything within a single context. You never develop the thing that actually matters most for long-term happiness, a sense of self that exists independent of your achievements. Jungkook's identity became entirely fused with BTS. He wasn't John Jungkook who happens to be in BTS. He was BTS's Jungkook. The group name came first. The individual came second. And for years, that was fine. It was more than fine, it was beautiful. The synergy, the brotherhood, the shared purpose. But then came June 2022. The Festa dinner. The moment that changed everything. For those who don't know, BTS holds an annual Festa celebration around their debut anniversary, and in 2022, they released a dinner video where the members sat together and openly discussed their decision to take an extended hiatus. It was raw. It was real. And it was devastating. Most of the conversation was thoughtful and measured, members talking about needing to find themselves, needing to grow individually, needing to explore who they are outside the group. But Jungkook's contribution to that conversation was the moment that destroyed ARMY. Because while the Hyungs were talking about solo albums and personal growth and artistic exploration, Jungkook sat there, visibly struggling, and said something that laid bare the fundamental crisis at the center of his existence. He expressed, through tears, that he didn't know what to do alone. He didn't have a clear solo direction. He didn't have a burning individual artistic vision. He didn't have a thing that he wanted to pursue outside of BTS the way RM had his art and philosophy, or Suga had his production work, or V had his acting dreams. Jungkook's thing was BTS. The group was his identity, his purpose, his reason for getting up in the morning. And the idea of that being taken away, even temporarily, terrified him in a way that the other members, who all had pre-BTS identities to fall back on, couldn't fully understand. And God, did he try. When the solo era began, Jungkook threw himself into it with the same relentless work ethic that earned him the Golden Magne title. He released 7 featuring Lado in July 2023, and it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Number 1. First week. The song was massive, a global smash that proved Jungkook's commercial power as a solo artist was staggering. He followed it with 3D, featuring Jack Harlow, another hit. And then came Golden, his debut solo album, released on November 3rd, 2023, a polished, confident, radio-ready pop record anchored by the standout track, Standing Next to You, which channeled Michael Jackson-level performance energy with choreography that went viral worldwide. Before all of this, he had already performed Dreamers at the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022 opening ceremony, a solo performance on arguably the biggest stage on Earth, watched by billions. On paper, Jungkook's solo career is the most commercially successful of any BTS member. The numbers don't lie. The chart positions don't lie. The streaming records don't lie. Number 1 RM. The leader who built the empire and then wondered if it was slowly destroying him. And here we are. Number 1. The top of the list. The member whose relationship with retirement, identity, and the future of BTS isn't just the most complex, it's the most consequential. Because when we talk about Kim Namjoon, we're not talking about just another member of the group. We're talking about the reason the group exists. The architect. The foundation. The first brick in a building that grew into a skyscraper that touched the sky and cast a shadow so enormous that even the man who laid that first brick sometimes couldn't find sunlight anymore. And that right there is the paradox that earns RM the number 1 spot on this countdown. The man who built BTS is the same man who has most openly, most painfully, and most philosophically wrestled with the question of whether BTS, the machine, the phenomenon, the global juggernaut, has consumed the person he was supposed to become. Let me take you all the way back. September 12th, 1994. Kim Namjoon is born in Ilsan, a planned suburban city in the Goyang district, northwest of Seoul. And from the start, this kid was different. Not different in the vague, generic way that entertainment profiles like to describe their subjects. Namjoon was measurably different. His IQ tested at 148. He was in the top 1% of the National University entrance exam. He was the kind of student who devoured books the way other kids devoured snacks, philosophy, literature, psychology, art history. He taught himself English not through formal classes, but by watching the American sitcom Friends with Korean subtitles, then without subtitles, then by mimicking the dialogue until he was functionally fluent. A teenager in suburban South Korea, self-teaching English through a 90s sitcom, and getting good enough at it that he would one day deliver speeches at the United Nations General Assembly. That's not just intelligence. That's a ferocious, almost intimidating intellectual curiosity that doesn't sit still, doesn't accept easy answers, and doesn't stop asking why. But before the UN, before the Grammys, before the stadiums and the billions of streams and the Cultural Revolution, there was hip-hop. Namjoon discovered Korean underground hip-hop as a teenager, and it consumed him the same way books did, completely, obsessively, with the intensity of someone who has finally found a language that matches the chaos inside his head. He started rapping under the name Runch Randa, and by his mid-teens, he was performing in underground clubs, battling other MCs, and building a reputation as one of the most technically gifted young rappers in the Korean underground scene. He was noticed by Sleepy of Untouchable, who connected him with Bang Si-hyuk, the producer and founder of Big Hit Entertainment, who would later be known as the man behind BTS. And when Bang Si-hyuk heard Namjoon rap, he didn't just see a talented teenager. He saw a leader. He saw someone who could anchor a group, who could be the intellectual and artistic center of gravity around which other talents could orbit. And so the plan was set, build a group around Kim Namjoon. That's the part most people don't fully grasp. BTS wasn't formed and then Namjoon was added. Namjoon was the starting point. Every other member was recruited, auditioned, and selected to complement him. When J-Hope arrived, it was because the group needed a main dancer and Namjoon couldn't fill that role. When Suga arrived, it was because the group needed another rapper with a different style to balance Namjoon's flow. When Jimin, V, and Jungkook arrived, it was because the group needed vocalists, visuals, and performers to round out what Namjoon had started. The entire structure of BTS was built on the foundation of Kim Namjoon's talent, vision, and leadership. He was the leader from day one, not elected, not rotating, not symbolic. Permanent. And being a permanent leader of a group that would become the biggest musical act in the world is a weight that most people cannot even begin to comprehend. Because a leader in K-pop isn't just the person who stands in the center of the formation or speaks first in interviews. A leader is the mediator when members fight, the motivator when morale drops, the spokesperson when the press comes calling, the translator, literally, in Namjoon's case, since he was the only member fluent in English for years, when the group goes international, the strategist when career decisions need to be made, the shield when criticism and controversy threaten to tear the group apart, and the emotional anchor when individual members are breaking down, struggling with self-doubt, battling depression, questioning their purpose, or wondering if any of it is worth it. For over a decade, Kim Namjoon has been all of those things for 6 other human beings while simultaneously trying to be his own person, pursue his own artistic vision, and maintain his own mental health. And the toll of that, the invisible, cumulative, soul-grinding toll, is what brought us to the Festa dinner in June 2022. Because here's the thing that most people don't realize about that dinner, the one where BTS announced their hiatus and the world collectively gasped. Namjoon was the one who started the conversation. He was the one who sat at that table, looked at his brothers, and said the things that nobody else was willing to say. He talked about feeling lost. He talked about BTS becoming a machine that was so big, so powerful, so demanding that the individual human beings inside it were being ground down. He talked about the group's musical direction becoming unclear, about the pressure to keep topping themselves, about the impossible expectations that came with being the biggest band in the world. He cried. Kim Namjoon, the leader, the rock, the unshakable intellectual force who had held everything together for 9 years, he sat at that table and cried. And what he said, through those tears, was something that fans have been dissecting, debating, and sometimes denying ever since. He said, essentially, that BTS needed to pause because the members, including himself, had lost their sense of who they were as individuals. That the group identity had become so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that the personal identities underneath were suffocating. That they couldn't make authentic music anymore because they didn't know what they authentically felt as individuals versus what they felt as BTS, the brand. That's not a scheduling issue. That's not a "we need a vacation" statement. That is an existential crisis articulated with the precision of a man who has thought about it deeply, painfully, for a long, long time before finally saying it out loud. And the reason this puts Namjoon at number 1 above Suga's brutal pragmatism, above Jungkook's identity dependency, above everyone, is that Namjoon isn't just experiencing the retirement question personally. He's experiencing it structurally. He built BTS. He is BTS in a foundational way that no other member is. And the realization that the thing he built might be hurting the people inside it, including himself, is the kind of realization that doesn't just make you consider retirement. It makes you question whether creation itself was a mistake. Now let's look at his solo work, because this is where Namjoon's inner world becomes fully visible. His first solo mixtape, RM, released in 2015, was a relatively straightforward hip-hop project, aggressive, confident, flexing. His second, Mono, released in 2018, was a dramatic departure, melancholic, introspective, atmospheric. Songs like Tokyo and Moonchild painted portraits of loneliness, of wandering through foreign cities, feeling disconnected from everything, of being famous and surrounded by people yet fundamentally alone. Mono was the first real signal that Namjoon was drifting away from the high-energy, crowd-pleasing sound of BTS toward something quieter, more personal, more his. Then came Indigo, his official solo album, released on December 2nd, 2022. And this album was not a BTS side project. This was Kim Namjoon, the 28-year-old man, sitting down and writing a diary of his late 20s, a period of his life defined by fame, confusion, artistic frustration, and a growing obsession with visual art that had become his primary emotional outlet outside of music. The album featured collaborations with artists like Erykah Badu, Anderson .Paak, and Eugene of Cherry Filter, choices that reflected Namjoon's eclectic taste and his desire to exist in a musical world far removed from K-pop. Songs like Wildflower dealt explicitly with the desire to find peace after years of burning brightly, to be a wildflower in a field rather than a firework in the sky. Still Life explored the tension between wanting to create meaningful art and being trapped in an industry that prioritizes commercial performance. The entire album felt like a man saying goodbye, not necessarily to music, but to a version of himself that he had outgrown. And then Right Place, Wrong Person, released on May 24, 2024, his second solo album, and arguably the most revealing piece of music any BTS member has ever released regarding the retirement question. The title alone is devastating. Right Place, Wrong Person. So there you have it. 7 members. 7 stories. 7 entirely different relationships with the same terrifying question. What happens when the music stops? We started at number 7 with V, the accidental idol who was never supposed to be here, a free spirit from the countryside of Gyeochang who dreams of trading stadium spotlights for quiet farmland, whose solo album Layover was literally named after a pause between journeys, and whose heart has always been pulled toward acting, art, and a life where the name Kim Taehyung means more than V from BTS. At number 6, J-Hope showed us what it looks like when the sunshine decides it's allowed to cast shadows. The man who proved at Lollapalooza that he can headline alone, who deconstructed his own optimism in Jack in the Box, and who volunteered to walk into military service with a calm that said, louder than any speech, I've already made my peace with what comes next. Number 5 brought us Jimin, and with him, the most heartbreaking battle on this list, not against the industry, not against contracts, but against himself. A perfectionist from Busan who almost didn't make the final lineup, who cries because he believes he's the weakest link in the strongest group on earth, and whose solo album face was a raw, unflinching confrontation with the question most people spend their whole lives avoiding, am I enough? At number 4, Jin reminded us what it means to be the eldest, the Hyung who was street scouted with no training, who spent a decade being everyone's emotional shelter, who enlisted first because that's what the oldest brother does, and who came back from 18 months of military life not broken but liberated, releasing an album called Happy as if to say, I've finally given myself permission to stop carrying everyone else. Number 3 was Suga, the one who refused to lie. The underground rapper from Daegu who hit a shattered shoulder because he was too poor and too desperate to risk losing his one shot, who built the August D trilogy as a deliberate 3-act farewell, who looked into cameras and said what no idol is supposed to say. BTS won't last forever, and who already knows exactly who Min Yoongi is when the stage lights go dark, a producer, behind the glass, making music until his hands can't move anymore. Number 2, Jungkook, gave us the story that hurts the most to tell, the golden magne who joined at 15, grew up entirely inside the BTS bubble, never had a normal adolescence, and sat at the Festa dinner in tears because he genuinely didn't know what to do alone. His solo numbers broke records. His talent is undeniable. But behind the charts and the choreography is a man who has never, not once in his conscious adult life, had to answer the question, who is Jungkook without BTS? And at number 1, RM, the leader, the architect, the reason BTS exists, showed us the heaviest truth of all, that the person who built the empire is the one most crushed by its weight. The man who started the hiatus conversation, who cried at the dinner table, who wrote Right Place, Wrong Person as an album-length confession that being at the top of the world doesn't mean you know who you are anymore. If Namjoon stays, BTS stays. If Namjoon walks, everything transforms. That's the gravity of being the foundation. Here's what it all comes down to. The Hybe contract isn't just a business document. It's a mirror. And when each of these 7 men looks into it, they don't see dollar signs or chart positions or brand deals. They see a reflection, and they have to decide whether the person staring back is someone they still recognize, someone they still want to be, or someone they've outgrown. BTS changed the world. That's a fact. No amount of contract expiration can undo what they've built, what they've meant to millions, what they've proven about the power of authenticity, vulnerability, and brotherhood in an industry designed to manufacture and discard. But the question was never whether BTS changed the world. The question is, did BTS change BTS? And the answer to that question is sitting inside 7 hearts, in 7 different rooms, in 7 different versions of the same sleepless night. Only they know. And soon, so will we. That's our list. If you made it this far, thank you. Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the world's biggest stars. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and never stop asking the questions that matter.